called ugly for wearing a mask. The widow's secret left them speechless. The bullet missed her face by inches. Margaret dove behind the water trough as another shot cracked through the dusty air of Copper Ridge. The leather mask covering half her face stayed firmly in place as she pulled her revolver and returned fire at the 3 men advancing down Main Street. She had come to town for supplies, nothing more. But Frank Dixon and his gang had other plans. Dixon laughed from behind a wooden post. "Look at that ugly witch hiding behind her mask. What are you afraid of, widow? Showing us that hideous face?" Margaret's jaw tightened beneath the mask. She fired twice, splintering wood near Dixon's head. The outlaw ducked back, his smile fading. She had 6 bullets left and 3 men to deal with. The townspeople had already scattered, leaving her alone in this fight. It was always this way. Ever since she moved to the territory 2 years ago, people whispered and stared. The mask made them uncomfortable. It made them cruel. "Come out and face us proper," Dixon called out.
"Or are you too scared?"
She was not scared. Not of them. Not anymore. Margaret had faced worse than petty outlaws and their ignorant taunts. She reloaded quickly, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. The sun beat down mercilessly on the empty street. Dust devils swirled between the buildings. Somewhere a horse whinnied nervously. Dixon's partner, a thin man named Pete, tried to circle around from the left. Margaret saw him moving between the general store and the saloon. She aimed carefully and fired. Pete yelped and stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. Not a killing shot, but enough to take him out of the fight. "You'll pay for that," Dixon snarled. He and the third man, a heavy-set brute called Lou, opened fire together. Bullets slammed into the water trough, sending splinters flying. One grazed Margaret's arm, tearing through her sleeve. She felt the hot sting, but pain was temporary. Survival was what mattered. She rolled to her right, coming up behind a wagon. From this angle, she had a clear shot at Lou. She took it. The big man went down hard, howling in pain as he grabbed his leg. That left only Dixon. The outlaw leader realized he was alone now. His cocky expression faltered for just a moment. "This ain't over, widow," he shouted, backing toward his horse. "Nobody shoots my boys and lives." Margaret stood up slowly, her gun trained on his chest. "Leave now and don't come back. Next time I won't aim for shoulders and legs." Dixon's face twisted with rage, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. He mounted his horse and helped his wounded companions onto theirs. As they rode off in a cloud of dust, he turned back one last time. "We'll be back for you, masked lady, and when we come, you'll wish you'd shown us that ugly face before we put you in the ground." Margaret watched them disappear down the road. She holstered her gun and looked around at the empty street. Slowly, cautiously, faces began appearing in windows and doorways. The blacksmith emerged from his shop. The shopkeeper peered out from behind his counter. Mrs. Adam Patterson stepped onto the boardwalk, her hand over her mouth. None of them had helped her. They never did. They watched, they whispered, they judged. But they never stood beside her when trouble came. Margaret walked to her horse, tied up outside the general store. Her arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed it, but she had dealt with worse wounds before. "Margaret!" a voice called out. She turned to see Sheriff Coleman approaching, his star glinting in the sunlight. He had been conveniently absent during the gunfight, as usual. "You all right?" "I'm fine. Dixon and his boys will be back, you know that." I know." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding the mask. "Maybe if you just showed folks your face, there'd be less trouble. People don't trust what they can't see." Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest. After all this time, after everything she had done to protect herself and even this ungrateful town, they still saw her as the problem. Not the outlaws. Her, the woman with the mask. "Maybe people should mind their own business," she said quietly. She climbed onto her horse and rode out of town without another word. Behind her, she could hear the murmurs starting up again, the speculation, the gossip. Let them talk. They always did. They called her ugly, cursed, touched by the devil. They made up stories about what lay beneath the leather mask. Some said she was horribly scarred. Others claimed she was hiding some terrible deformity. A few whispered that she was not even human at all. None of them knew the truth, and Margaret intended to keep it that way. Her ranch sat 5 miles outside of town, nestled in a valley between 2 rocky hills. It was not much, just a small house, a barn, and enough land for a few cattle and horses. But it was hers. She had bought it with her own money, built it with her own hands after her husband died. Jacob would have been proud of what she had accomplished here. He had always believed in her strength, even when she doubted herself. Margaret tended to her wound, cleaning it and wrapping it with practiced efficiency. She had learned field medicine out of necessity. When you lived alone on the frontier and wore a mask that made doctors uncomfortable, you learned to take care of yourself. She changed into a fresh shirt and started on her evening chores. The cattle needed feeding, the horses needed water. Work did not stop for bullet wounds or hurt feelings. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Margaret stood on her porch and looked out at the land. This was her sanctuary. Out here, away from judgmental eyes and cruel words, she could breathe. She could be herself without explanation or apology. The mask was still there, always there. But at least here she wore it on her own terms. A rider appeared on the horizon. Margaret's hand went instinctively to her gun, but as the figure drew closer, she recognized the horse and rider. It was Danny, the young deputy who sometimes brought her supplies when she did not want to face the town. He was a good kid, one of the few people who treated her with basic human decency. "Evening, Margaret," Danny called out as he rode up. He dismounted and pulled a package from his saddlebag. "Brought you the flour and coffee you ordered. Figured after today's excitement you might not want to come back to town for a while. Thank you, Danny." "What do I owe you?" "Already paid for at the store." "I just played delivery boy." He handed her the package, then hesitated. "Margaret, there's talk in town about Dixon." "He's got more men riding with him now, maybe 15 or 20. They're holed up somewhere in the canyon country. Word is, they're planning something big." Margaret's eyes narrowed behind the mask. "Planning what?" "Don't know for sure. But Dixon's been asking about you. He wants revenge for what happened today. You embarrassed him in front of the whole town." "He embarrassed himself by losing to one woman." Danny smiled at that, but worry clouded his young face. "You should leave for a while. Head north, maybe visit some family, just until this blows over." "I have no family, and I will not run from bullies and cowards." The deputy sighed. He had known she would say that. Margaret was the most stubborn person he had ever met. It was one of the things he admired about her, even if it scared him sometimes. "Just be careful, all right? And if you need help, you send word. I'll come running." After Danny left, Margaret sat on her porch with her rifle across her lap. The night grew dark and cold. Stars appeared overhead, countless and indifferent. Somewhere out there, Frank Dixon was gathering his men and planning his revenge. Let him come. She had survived worse than a two-bit outlaw with a bruised ego. She had survived loss, grief, and the cruelty of small minds. She would survive this too. But as she sat there in the darkness, Margaret allowed herself a moment of weariness. She was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being alone. Tired of the mask and everything it represented. The secret she carried was heavy, heavier than any burden she had ever known. And sometimes, in moments like this, she wondered if it might be easier to just tell the truth and face whatever consequences came. But no. The truth would destroy everything. It would put innocent people at risk. It would unravel carefully laid plans that had taken years to build. Some secrets were meant to be kept, no matter the cost. Even if that cost was loneliness. Even if it meant being called ugly by people who could not see past their own fear and ignorance. Margaret went inside and barred the door. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight she would rest and prepare. Because she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Frank Dixon was coming for her. And when he did, she would be ready. The widow with the mask had faced death before. She was not afraid to face it again. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Margaret was checking her fence line when she spotted smoke rising from the direction of town. Something big was burning. She saddled her horse and rode hard toward Copper Ridge, her heart pounding with dread. As she crested the hill overlooking the town, she saw the chaos below. The bank was on fire. People ran through the streets screaming. Gunshots echoed off the buildings. Dixon had made his move. Margaret rode down into the town at full gallop. She could see Dixon's gang terrorizing the citizens, firing guns in the air, smashing windows, dragging people from their homes. There were at least 20 of them, maybe more. They wore bandanas over their faces and rode through the streets like a plague of locusts. The sheriff and his deputies were pinned down behind the jail, outnumbered and outgunned. This was her fault. Dixon had come because of her. These people were suffering because she had humiliated him yesterday. The guilt hit her like a physical blow, but there was no time to dwell on it. She had to act. Margaret tied her horse behind the church and moved through the back alleys, staying out of sight. She needed to get to a position where she could make a difference. From the roof of the general store, she had a clear view of Main Street. She could see Dixon directing his men from horseback, laughing as they looted and destroyed. The outlaw leader was in his element, drunk on power and violence. Margaret took careful aim with her rifle. One shot. That was all it would take to end this. Remove the leader, and the gang would scatter like rats. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but then she saw them. Children. 3 of them huddled behind a water barrel, frozen with fear. They were directly in her line of fire. If she missed, if the bullet went through Dixon or ricocheted, those children would die. She could not take that risk. Margaret lowered the rifle and looked for another option. She had to get closer. Much closer. Margaret climbed down from the roof and moved through the smoke and chaos. A gang member spotted her and raised his gun. She was faster. He dropped before he could fire. Another one came around the corner. She took him down with a knife, quiet and efficient. Years of survival had taught her many ways to fight. Dixon's voice boomed over the noise. "Where is she? Where's the masked widow?" "I know she's here. Come out and face me, you coward. Or I'll start burning houses with people still inside." Margaret stepped into the street. The smoke parted around her like a curtain. She stood 50 feet from Dixon, her gun drawn and ready. The outlaw leader's eyes lit up with savage glee when he saw her. "There you are," he said. "I was hoping you'd show. Boys, grab her." 4 men moved toward her. Margaret fired rapidly, dropping 2 of them. The other 2 dove for cover. She reloaded without taking her eyes off Dixon. The outlaw leader laughed and dismounted from his horse. He walked toward her slowly, confidently. He had at least 15 men still standing. She was alone. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that," Dixon said, "but it's over. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Time to take off that mask and show everyone what's underneath before you die." Margaret's voice was steady. "You want to see what's under the mask? Come and take it." Dixon drew his gun and fired. Margaret moved, but not fast enough. The bullet caught her in the side, spinning her around. She hit the ground hard, pain exploding through her body. Through the haze of agony, she saw Dixon walking toward her, his gun pointed at her head. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in some blaze of glory, but in the dirt of a town that never wanted her anyway. But then something unexpected happened. The townspeople emerged from their hiding places. The blacksmith came first, carrying a hammer. Then Mrs. Patterson with a shotgun. The shopkeeper. The baker. Even old Mr. Brute. Henderson, who could barely walk. They formed a line between Margaret and Dixon, facing down the outlaw gang. "You want her, you go through us," the blacksmith said. Dixon stared at them in disbelief. "You're going to die for her, for that masked freak? She saved this town more times than we can count, Mrs. Ryer," Patterson said. "While we hid and whispered, she fought."
"She bled for us, and we're ashamed we never stood with her before."
"But we're standing now." Danny appeared, helping other deputies surround the gang from behind. The tide had turned. Dixon's men began backing away, realizing they were now the ones outnumbered. The outlaw leader's face twisted with rage, but he was smart enough to know when a fight was lost. He pointed at Margaret one last time. "This ain't over." But it was. Dixon and his surviving men rode out of town in defeat. Margaret lay in the dirt, bleeding and barely conscious. Hands lifted her gently. Someone pressed cloth against her wound. She heard voices, concerned and caring, so different from the cruel whispers she was used to. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Mrs. Patterson's face, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Margaret woke 3 days later in the doctor's office. Her side was bandaged and throbbing with pain, but she was alive. Sunlight streamed through the window. For a moment she forgot where she was, forgot everything that had happened. Then it all came rushing back. The gunfight. The townspeople defending her. The surprising solidarity of people who had always kept their distance. She reached up to touch her face and felt the mask still in place. Good. No one had removed it while she was unconscious. The secret was still safe. The door opened, and Dr. Stevens entered, a kind-faced man in his 50s. He smiled when he saw her awake. "Welcome back, Margaret. You gave us quite a scare." "How long have I been out?" 3 days. "You lost a lot of blood, but the bullet passed clean through."
No vital organs hit.
"You were lucky." Lucky. Margaret almost laughed at that. She supposed she was lucky in some ways. Lucky to be alive. Lucky that the townspeople had finally shown some courage. Lucky that the doctor had respected her privacy and left the mask alone. She tried to sit up, but pain lanced through her side. The doctor gently pushed her back down. "Easy now. You need rest. That wound will take weeks to heal properly. I need to get back to my ranch. The animals need care." Danny's been taking care of them. That boy's been here every day checking on you. Half the town has, actually. They're all worried about you. That surprised her more than anything. Margaret had grown so accustomed to being an outsider that the idea of people caring about her welfare seemed almost impossible. The doctor must have seen the confusion on her face because he'd pulled up a chair and sat down beside the bed. Margaret, what you did during the raid opened a lot of eyes. People realize they've been treating you poorly, judging you without knowing anything about you. They want to make amends. They don't need to make amends. I did what needed to be done. That's exactly the kind of response they expected from you. You're too proud to accept help or kindness. But maybe it's time you learn that accepting help isn't a weakness. It's just being human. The doctor left her to rest, but his words stayed with her. Being human. When had she last allowed herself to be simply human? Not a widow, not a mystery, not the woman with the mask. Just Margaret, just herself. It had been so long she barely remembered what that felt like. Over the following days, visitors came in a steady stream. Mrs. Patterson brought homemade soup. The blacksmith offered to repair her fence for free. Even Sheriff Coleman stopped by, hat in hand, to apologize for not doing more to protect her from Dixon's harassment. The town was trying, genuinely trying, to bridge the gap they had created with their fear and ignorance. Margaret accepted their gestures with quiet grace, though part of her remained guarded. Trust was not rebuilt overnight. These same people had stood by while she was mocked and threatened. They had made her fight alone for 2 years. A few kind words and gifts could not erase that pain, but she recognized their efforts as genuine, and that meant something. On the 5th day, Margaret was finally strong enough to leave the doctor's office. Danny helped her onto her horse and rode with her back to the ranch. The young deputy had indeed been taking care of her animals. Everything was in order. As they stood on her porch watching the sunset, Danny worked up the courage to ask the question everyone wanted to ask. "Margaret, why do you wear the mask? What are you hiding?" She looked at him for a long moment. Danny had been nothing but kind to her from the day they met. If anyone deserved the truth, it was him. But the truth was too dangerous, too complicated. It would put too many lives at risk, so she gave him the only answer she could. "Some secrets are better left buried, Danny. Trust me on that." The deputy nodded slowly. "All right. But whatever it is, whatever reason you have, I want you to know it doesn't matter to me. You're a good person, mask or no mask. I hope someday you'll trust us enough to share your burden. But until then, I'll respect your privacy." After Danny left, Margaret went inside and stood before the small mirror hanging on her wall. She looked at the leather mask covering the right side of her face from temple to jaw. She had worn it for so long it felt like part of her skin. Slowly, carefully, she reached up and unbuckled the straps. The mask came away in her hands. The face that looked back at her from the mirror was not scarred or deformed. It was not touched by disease or marked by violence. It was simply the face of a woman in her early 30s, plain and unremarkable. The right side of her face was exactly the same as the left. There was no physical reason for the mask at all. The secret she hid was not a disfigurement of flesh. It was something far more complicated and far more dangerous. Margaret ran her fingers over her bare skin, feeling the texture she had hidden for years. Then she put the mask back on and buckled it securely. Not yet. The time was not right. There were still too many unknowns, too many risks. But someday, when the danger had passed and the truth could be safely told, she would remove the mask for good. Until then, she would continue to be the widow of Copper Ridge, the woman with the secret. The fighter who stood alone. Except she was not alone anymore. Not really. The town had shown her that despite their flaws and fears, they could rise to the occasion when it mattered. They had stood between her and death. That had to count for something. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for genuine connection after all. Maybe she did not have to carry her burden entirely alone. But first there was unfinished business. Frank Dixon was still out there, wounded in pride and plotting his next move. Margaret knew he would not let this go. Men like Dixon never did. They nursed their grudges and waited for the perfect moment to strike. She would have to be ready. And next time she would not hold back. Next time she would end it permanently. Margaret spent the next 2 weeks recovering and preparing. Her wound healed slower than she liked, but eventually her strength returned. She practiced her shooting every day, pushing through the pain. She reinforced the defenses around her ranch, setting up warning systems and escape routes. She made contingency plans for every scenario she could imagine. If Dixon came for her again, she would be ready. But Dixon did not come. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into a month. There was no sign of the outlaw or his gang. It was as if they had vanished into the wilderness. The town slowly returned to normal. The burned buildings were rebuilt, the people went about their daily lives, and Margaret remained on her ranch, vigilant and waiting. Then one evening, as autumn began painting the leaves gold and red, a stranger rode up to her property. He was an older man, well-dressed and official-looking. He dismounted and approached the porch with his hands visible, showing he meant no harm. Margaret kept her gun ready anyway. Strangers were rarely good news. "Mrs. Margaret Cole?" the man asked. "Who's asking? My name is Henry Walsh. I'm a federal marshal out of Denver. I've been looking for you for a very long time." Margaret's blood ran cold. This was it. The moment she had been dreading for years. The past had finally caught up with her. Her hand tightened on her gun, but the marshal made no move to draw his own weapon. Instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it up. "I'm not here to arrest you. I'm here because we need your help. May I come up?" Against her better judgment, Margaret nodded. The marshal climbed the porch steps and handed her the paper. She unfolded it and saw a list of names. 10 names in total. All of them were members of the Garrett crime family, one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the West, and next to each name was a status, dead or captured. All except one. James Garrett. The patriarch. The man who had started it all. "We've been taking down the Garrett family for 5 years, Marshal Walsh explained. It's been slow, dangerous work. Many good lawmen have died in the effort. But we're almost done. There's only one left. James Garrett himself. And we believe he's in this territory, somewhere near Copper Ridge." Margaret looked up from the paper, her mind racing. "What does this have to do with me?" "You know exactly what it has to do with you, Mrs. Cole. Or should I say, Agent Cole?" The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Agent Cole, the identity she had abandoned 3 years ago, the life she had left behind when everything went wrong. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she folded the paper and handed it back to the marshal. "That person doesn't exist anymore. I'm just a rancher now, a widow trying to live in peace." "There is no peace while James Garrett lives," Walsh said firmly. "You know that better than anyone. You were the best agent we ever had. You infiltrated his organization. You gathered the intelligence that allowed us to take down his sons, his lieutenants, his entire network. And then you vanished. We looked everywhere for you. 3 years of searching, and here you are, hiding behind a mask in a small frontier town." Margaret turned away from him, looking out at the darkening landscape. 3 years ago, she had been Agent Catherine Morrison, a federal operative specializing in deep undercover work. She had spent 2 years embedded in the Garrett organization, posing as the wife of one of James Garrett's associates. It had been the most dangerous assignment of her career. She had witnessed terrible things, done terrible things. All in the name of bringing down one of the West's most violent crime families. But then her cover was blown. Someone talked. James Garrett discovered who she really was. He killed her partner, a man named Jacob who had posed as her husband. Jacob had not just been her partner in the operation. They had fallen in love during the assignment, breaking every rule in the book. His death shattered her. In the chaos that followed, she barely escaped with her life. The agency declared her missing in action, presumed dead. And she let them believe it. She ran, changed her name, became Margaret Cole, a simple widow with a mysterious past. She wore the mask not to hide scars, but to hide her face. James Garrett had seen her real face. If anyone from that old life recognized her, she would be dead within hours. The mask was her shield, her protection, her only hope of staying hidden long enough for the danger to pass. But the danger had not passed. It had followed her here. "How did you find me?" Margaret asked quietly. "We didn't. James Garrett did. We've been tracking his movements for months. He's been searching for something, or someone, in this region. When I saw your name connected to the Dixon raid, I put the pieces together. Catherine Morrison was known for her skill with a gun and her tendency to wear distinctive clothing to hide her identity during assignments. A masked widow defending a small town fits that profile perfectly. Margaret felt the walls closing in. If you figured it out, Garrett will too, if he hasn't already. That's why I'm here. We need you to come back. Finish this. Help us take down James Garrett once and for all. You're the only one who knows him well enough to predict his moves." "I can't go back to that life. I won't." Marshal Walsh stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "You don't have a choice. Garrett is here because of you. He's been hunting you for 3 years, and he won't stop until you're dead. The only way you survive this is if we get him first. Work with us. Help us end this. Then you can have your peace. Not this half-life hiding behind a mask. Margaret wanted to refuse. She wanted to send the marshal away and pretend this conversation never happened. But he was right. James Garrett would never stop. He was obsessed with revenge. Every day she stayed in Copper Ridge put the townspeople at risk. The people who had finally started accepting her. The people who had stood up for her against Dixon. They did not deserve to be caught in the crossfire of her past. "What's your plan?" she asked. Marshal Walsh smiled grimly. "We set a trap. Use you as bait. Garrett wants you dead more than anything in this world. When he makes his move, we'll be ready. You want me to paint a target on my back and hope your men are fast enough to save me? I won't lie to you. It's dangerous, but it's the best chance we have. And it's the best chance you have at a real future." Margaret thought about Jacob, about the life they had planned together after the mission, the little ranch they would buy, the quiet years ahead. All of that died with him 3 years ago. Since then, she had been living in limbo, neither truly alive nor truly free. Maybe it was time to face the past. Maybe it was time to finish what she started. "All right," she said. "I'll do it, but on my terms. I plan the operation. I choose the location, and if anything goes wrong, I'm not sacrificing innocent lives to get Garrett. Agreed? Agreed?" They shook hands, sealing the deal. Margaret felt a strange mixture of dread and relief. The waiting was over. One way or another, this would end soon. She would either finally be free of James Garrett, or she would die trying. Both options seemed preferable to living in fear indefinitely. Over the next week, Margaret and Marshal Walsh worked out the details of their plan. Garrett's last known location placed him about 50 miles north, moving in a pattern that suggested he was systematically searching the territory. It was only a matter of time before he reached Copper Ridge. They needed to control when and where the confrontation happened. Margaret chose an abandoned silver mine in the hills east of town. It was remote, defensible, and had multiple escape routes, perfect for an ambush. Walsh brought in 6 of his best deputies, all experienced lawmen who had fought the Garrett family before. They spent days preparing the site, setting up positions and planning contingencies. The townspeople noticed the increased activity. Danny asked questions, but Margaret could not tell him the truth. Not yet. She simply said she was helping the marshal with an investigation. The young deputy accepted this at face value, trusting her as he always had. That trust made her chest ache. These people had finally accepted her, and now she might bring disaster down upon them. 2 days before the planned ambush, everything changed. Margaret was in town buying supplies when she heard screaming. She ran toward the sound and found Mrs. Patterson collapsed in the street, her grandson cradled in her arms. The boy, little Timothy, was pale and gasping. Poison. Someone had poisoned the town well. Panic erupted as more people fell sick. Margaret helped carry the victims to the doctor's office, her mind racing. This was not random. This was deliberate. And she knew exactly who was responsible. James Garrett had found her. He was not waiting for the ambush. He was making his move now, in the worst possible way. Margaret found Marshal Walsh at the sheriff's office. His face was grim. "It's Garrett." "Has to be." "He's forcing your hand. He knows he won't let innocent people die. What does he want?" "You. In exchange for the antidote." As if on cue, a rider appeared at the edge of town. He was young, barely more than a boy, and terrified. He held up a piece of paper and shouted in a trembling voice, "Message for the masked lady." "From Mr. Garrett. You come to the old mission at sunset. Alone, or everyone in this town dies. He's got the cure. But you gotta trade yourself for it." The rider dropped the paper and fled. Margaret picked it up and read the neat, familiar handwriting. James Garrett's words were simple and direct. Her life or theirs. Come alone or watch them all die slowly and painfully. He even included a description of the poison. It was slow-acting but lethal. Without the antidote, every person who drank from that well would be dead within 3 days. "It's a trap," Walsh said. "He'll kill you the moment you show up." "Maybe, but I don't have a choice. Look at them." Through the window, they could see the sick townspeople. Timothy was convulsing now, his grandmother sobbing over him. The doctor worked frantically, but without knowing what poison was used, he could do nothing. People were dying. Margaret's people, her town. The place that had finally become something like home. "I have to go," she said. "Then we go with you. Hidden. We set up around the mission and take him when he appears. He'll expect that. If he sees anyone but me, he'll disappear and let everyone die. You can't face him alone. He'll have men with him. You'll be outnumbered." Margaret checked her guns methodically. "I've been outnumbered before." She left before Walsh could argue further. The old mission was an hour's ride from town, a crumbling Spanish structure that had been abandoned for decades. Margaret arrived as the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood red. She dismounted and walked through the broken archway into the courtyard. James Garrett was waiting for her. He stood in the center of the courtyard, older than she remembered, but still radiating that cold, calculating menace. He was flanked by 4 men, all armed. At his feet was a small wooden box. The antidote. "Catherine," Garrett said, using her real name. "It's been a long time. Not long enough. You look different. The mask is a nice touch, though I must say I prefer seeing your whole face. Take it off. Give me the antidote first." Garrett smiled, a predator's smile with no warmth in it. "Still trying to negotiate. Still playing the hero. You never learn, do you? You destroyed my family, my sons, my empire. Everything I built over 30 years, gone because of you. And you thought you could just disappear? Start a new life? Pretend none of it happened? Your family destroyed themselves. It chose violence and crime. I just helped speed up the inevitable. Philosophical as ever. I always admired that about you, even when you were lying to my face. You almost had me fooled, you know? The devoted wife. The loyal companion. I never suspected you were a federal agent until my idiot nephew got drunk and spilled the truth. That was a mistake on his part, one I corrected personally." Margaret's hand moved toward her gun, but Garrett's men were faster. 4 weapons pointed at her heart. She froze. Garrett said, "Not yet. We're going to do this properly. First, you're going to tell me where the federal marshal is hiding. I know he's here somewhere." "Walsh has been chasing me for years. He's not the type to let you walk into danger alone. I came alone. Liar. But that's all right. I'll find him eventually. Second, you're going to remove that ridiculous mask and look me in the eye while I explain exactly how you're going to die. And third, after I've killed you slowly and painfully, I'll give the antidote to your little town. I'm a man of my word, unlike you." Margaret weighed her options. 4 guns trained on her. Garrett standing just out of reach. The antidote in that box, so close yet impossibly far. She could try to draw and fire, but she would be dead before her gun cleared leather. She could try to rush Garrett, but his men would cut her down. Every tactical option led to failure, unless she changed the game entirely. "You want to know the truth, Garrett?" Margaret said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "The truth is, I wasn't lying about everything. Jacob and I did fall in love. It wasn't part of the cover. It was real. And when you killed him, you didn't just take away my partner. You took away the only person who ever really saw me, the only person who loved me for who I actually was, not who I pretended to be." How touching. Am I supposed to feel sympathy? No. I just wanted you to understand that when I kill you, it won't be for justice. It won't be for the law. It will be for Jacob. This is personal. Garrett laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the ancient walls. "Kill me? You can't even reach your gun without dying. Your bravado is impressive, but ultimately pointless. Now remove the mask." Margaret reached up and unbuckled the mask. It fell away, revealing her face fully for the first time in 3 years. Garrett stared at her, recognition flooding his features. And in that moment of distraction, Margaret moved. She did not go for her gun. Instead, she dove to the side, rolling toward one of the mission's crumbling pillars. Garrett's men fired, but their shots hit empty air. Margaret came up behind the pillar and threw something small and round into the courtyard. A smoke bomb, something she had prepared weeks ago for the original ambush plan. Thick gray smoke exploded outward, filling the entire space in seconds. Chaos erupted. Garrett shouted orders. His men fired blindly into the smoke. But Margaret was already moving, using her intimate knowledge of the mission's layout. She had scouted this location days ago as a potential ambush site. She knew every crack, every shadow, every possible angle. She took down the first guard with a knife, silent and efficient. The second one she shot through the smoke, using his muzzle flash as a target. The third and fourth guards panicked and ran, disappearing into the gathering darkness. That left only Garrett. The smoke began to clear. Margaret and Garrett stood facing each other across the courtyard, both with guns drawn. Neither fired. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, 2 survivors of a brutal war. 2 people who had lost everything to violence and betrayal. You were always good, Garrett admitted. Better than I gave you credit for, but you're not good enough to beat me. I just have to outlast you. They fired simultaneously. Both bullets found their mark. Margaret felt the impact in her shoulder, spinning her around. She hit the ground hard, her gun skittering away. Through blurring vision, she saw Garrett stumble backward, clutching his chest. He fell to his knees, blood spreading across his white shirt. The old criminal looked down at the wound with something like surprise. "Huh," he said. "Guess you were good enough after all." He collapsed face first onto the ancient stones. Margaret tried to stand, but her legs would not support her. She had been shot twice, once in the shoulder, once in the side. The world was spinning, colors bleeding together. She needed to get the antidote, had to get it back to town. People were dying. She crawled across the courtyard, leaving a trail of blood behind her. Every movement was agony. Her fingers closed around the wooden box. Got it. Now she just needed to get to her horse, just needed to ride back to town. Simple. Easy. Except her vision was darkening and her body was shutting down, and she was so very tired. Footsteps. Marshal Walsh appeared, materializing out of the shadows with his deputies. He had been there all along, hidden and waiting. He rushed at her side, his weathered face creased with worry. "I told you to stay back," Margaret whispered. "And I told you I wouldn't let you die. We're getting you to the doctor." "Stay with me, Catherine. Don't you dare die now." She tried to answer, but darkness swallowed her words. The last thing she felt was Walsh lifting her gently, cradling her like something precious. The last thing she heard was him shouting orders to his men, and then nothing. Consciousness returned in fragments. Pain first, sharp and insistent. Then voices, muffled and distant. Then light, too bright against her eyelids. Margaret tried to move, but her body refused to cooperate. Every muscle felt like lead. Her mouth was dry as sand. Someone was holding her hand. The grip was familiar, gentle but firm. She forced her eyes open and found Danny sitting beside her bed, his young face haggard with exhaustion. "You're awake," he said, relief flooding his features. "Thank God. We thought we'd lost you." Margaret's throat was too dry to speak. Danny helped her sip water, supporting her head with surprising tenderness. Slowly, the world came into focus. She was in the doctor's office again. How many times had she woken up in this room? Too many. Her shoulder and side were heavily bandaged. She could feel the tight pull of stitches beneath the wrappings. She had survived. Again. How long? She managed to croak. 4 days. The doctor said you lost so much blood, it's a miracle you're alive. Marshal Walsh brought you back on his horse, riding like the devil himself was chasing him. Got here just in time. Another 10 minutes and you'd have bled out. Margaret's mind immediately went to the townspeople, the poison, the antidote. She tried to sit up, panic surging through her, but Danny gently pushed her back down.
"Easy. Everyone's fine."
The marshal got the antidote to Doc Stevens in time. Garrett had written instructions with it, probably planning to let us all die even if you showed up. But Walsh delivered it and Doc administered it to everyone who drank from the well. Timothy and the others are recovering. You saved them all. Relief washed over her so powerfully it brought tears to her eyes. They were safe. The town was safe. She had not failed them. The weight she had carried for days lifted slightly, though the guilt of bringing danger to their doorstep remained. Danny squeezed her hand, seeming to read her thoughts. "Marshal Walsh told us everything about who you really are, about the Garrett family and why you were hiding, about your partner Jacob and what happened to him. The whole town knows now, Margaret. Or should I call you Catherine?" Margaret closed her eyes, so the truth was finally out. Her carefully constructed new life shattered. Everyone knew she was not just a mysterious widow, but a federal agent who had brought a dangerous criminal to their town. They must hate her, must blame her for the poisoning, for the danger, for all of it. She had brought this on them with her past. "I know what you're thinking," Danny said quietly. "And you're wrong. People aren't angry. They're grateful. You risked your life to save ours. You faced down one of the most dangerous men in the West alone to protect us. That's what matters. Not where you came from, or what name you use. What matters is who you are right here, right now. My past put you all in danger. Your past caught up with you. There's a difference. You didn't choose to have Garrett hunting you. You were doing your job, trying to make the world safer. And when he came here, you didn't run. You stood and fought. That's courage, Margaret. That's heroism." Margaret wanted to believe him, but the guilt was too heavy. She had worn the mask to protect these people from her past, but the mask had not been enough. Nothing was ever enough against someone as determined as James Garrett. At least now he was gone. At least that nightmare was finally over. "Is he really dead?" she asked. Danny nodded. Marshal Walsh confirmed it. Garrett died at the mission. His body has been transported back to Denver for identification. "It's over, Margaret."
You're free.
The word felt strange and unfamiliar. Margaret had not been truly free since she joined the agency 8 years ago. Every assignment had been another chain, another weight, and the undercover work with the Garrett family had been the heaviest burden of all. Now that burden was lifted. James Garrett was dead. His family was destroyed. The mission that cost Jacob his life was finally truly complete. She should feel relieved, victorious. But all she felt was tired. Over the next week, Margaret's strength slowly returned. The doctor changed her bandages daily, monitoring for infection. The wounds were healing well, though they would leave significant scars. More scars to add to the collection, both visible and invisible. She had lost count of how many times she had been shot, stabbed, beaten. The life of an agent was brutal on the body and soul. The townspeople visited in shifts, bringing food, flowers, books. Mrs. Patterson came every day, sometimes just sitting quietly beside the bed, knitting or reading aloud. The blacksmith made her a new set of horseshoes for when she was well enough to ride again. Even Sheriff Coleman stopped by, awkwardly apologizing for every time he had failed to support her. The town was reaching out, trying to bridge the gap that her secret identity had created. Marshal Walsh visited on the 8th day. He looked older than when Margaret first met him, the stress of the operation etched into his weathered face. He pulled up a chair and sat down heavily, his marshal's star catching the afternoon light. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I got shot twice and nearly died." "So about how I expected." Walsh smiled at that. "Still got your sense of humor." "That's good. Means you're healing." He pulled out an envelope from his coat pocket and placed it on the bedside table. "I have some things to discuss with you. Official things. But first, I want to say thank you. What you did was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. You should never have faced Garrett alone. I didn't have a choice. He would have let everyone die."
I know.
"And that's what makes it brave. You put yourself in mortal danger to save people who had treated you poorly for years. Most folks wouldn't do that, but you did. Because despite everything you've been through, you still believe in protecting the innocent. That's what made you such a good agent." The past tense did not escape her notice. "Made as in no longer?" Walsh gestured to the envelope. "That's your official termination paperwork. As of yesterday, you are no longer an active federal agent. You've been honorably discharged from service with full benefits and commendations. The agency thanks you for your years of dedicated work and wishes you well in your civilian life." Margaret stared at the envelope. 8 years of service. 8 years of risking her life, sacrificing her identity, living in shadows and lies. And now it was over. Just like that. A piece of paper and some polite words. She should feel grateful. She had wanted out of this life for years, but instead she felt unmoored. Being an agent had defined her for so long. Who was she without it? "There's more," Walsh continued. "The government is offering you compensation for your undercover work with the Garrett family. It's substantial, enough to buy a much larger ranch, hire hands, live comfortably for the rest of your life. They're also offering to relocate you anywhere you want with a new identity. Clean slate. A fresh start. No one would ever know about your past. And if I don't want to relocate, then you don't have to. You can stay here in Copper Ridge as Margaret Cole. Keep your ranch. Live your life. The choice is yours. For the first time in a long time, you get to decide your own future." Margaret looked out the window at the town beyond. Copper Ridge had been a place of exile at first, somewhere to hide and wait for the danger to pass. But over time, it had become something more. These people, for all their flaws and fears, had become her community. They had stood up for her when it mattered. They had shown her kindness in her darkest hours. Leaving would be easier in some ways. No reminders of the past. No judgmental looks or whispered questions. But it would also mean abandoning the first real home she had known since Jacob died. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands indefinitely." Walsh stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I think you should stay. These people care about you. And I think you care about them too, even if you won't admit it. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves be known. Really known. Mask and all." After Walsh left, Margaret opened the envelope. Inside were official documents, letters of commendation, and a bank draft for an amount that made her breath catch. It was more money than she had ever seen, more than enough to start over anywhere in the world. She could go to San Francisco, New York, even Europe if she wanted. She could become anyone, do anything. The possibilities were dizzying and terrifying in equal measure. That evening, Danny brought her dinner and lingered to talk. They spoke of inconsequential things at first. The weather, the harvest, the new school teacher who had arrived in town. But eventually, the conversation turned to more serious matters. "People are wondering if you're going to stay," Danny said carefully. "There's been talk. Some folks think you'll leave now that the danger's past. Others hope you'll stick around. I'm in the second group, if you're curious. Why would you want me to stay? I brought nothing but trouble to this town. You brought yourself, and yourself is pretty great, trouble or not." Danny blushed at his own boldness, but pushed on. "You've helped more people than you realize, Margaret, not just with the big dramatic stuff like the Dixon raid or the Garrett confrontation, but the small things too. You helped me learn to shoot better. You taught Mrs. Patterson's grandson how to gentle horses. You've repaired fences for folks who couldn't afford the blacksmith. You've been a good neighbor and a good friend, even when people didn't deserve it." Margaret felt something warm and uncomfortable in her chest. She was not used to being seen this way, as someone valuable, someone worth keeping around. Her entire adult life had been about usefulness, about what she could do for the mission. But Danny was talking about her as a person, not as an asset or agent. It was strange and wonderful and frightening all at once. "I don't know who I am without the mask," she admitted quietly, "without the mystery and the secrets. I've been hiding for so long I'm not sure I remember how to be just myself." "Then maybe it's time to find out. The real you, not Agent Morrison or even the widow Margaret Cole, just you. Whoever that is. Catherine." Her real name sounded foreign after years of not hearing it. She had been Catherine Morrison before she became an agent. A farm girl from Ohio with dreams of adventure and justice. That girl felt like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. Could she find her way back to that person? Or had too much happened? Too much blood spilled? Too many lies told? Maybe there was no going back. Maybe she could only go forward, carrying all her identities with her. Agent, widow, survivor. All of it was true. All of it was her. 2 weeks after waking, Margaret was finally strong enough to leave the doctor's office. She insisted on riding back to her ranch alone despite protests from Danny and the doctor. She needed time to think. Space to breathe. The ride was slow and painful, her healing wounds protesting every movement. But it felt good to be on horseback again, to feel the wind on her face and the sun on her skin. The ranch looked different somehow. Or maybe she was different. The small house, the barn, the corral where her horses grazed peacefully. It all seemed both familiar and strange, like a place she had visited in a dream. She dismounted carefully and stood in the yard, taking it all in. This was hers. She had built it with her own hands. Whatever she decided about her future, this place would always be part of her story. Inside the house, she found evidence of visitors. Fresh flowers in a vase, clean linens on the bed, firewood stacked neatly by the hearth. The townspeople had been taking care of her home while she recovered. The realization brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She was so tired of being strong. So tired of standing alone. Maybe it was okay to accept help. Maybe it was okay to let people in, even knowing they might see the broken parts of her. Margaret walked to the mirror and looked at her reflection. For the first time in 3 years, her face was completely bare. No mask. No hiding. Just her. The woman looking back at her had scars, both physical and emotional. Lines around her eyes from squinting into the sun and frowning through pain. A hardness in her jaw from clenching through difficult decisions. But there was something else, too. A strength. A resilience. A stubborn refusal to be destroyed by circumstances. She had survived. Against all odds, she had survived. She picked up the mask from where it sat on her dresser. The leather was worn and cracked from years of use. It had been her shield, her protection, her secret. But it had also been her prison. As long as she wore it, she was hiding. Not just from James Garrett or the past, but from genuine connection. From being fully seen and known. Danny's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves be known. Margaret made her decision. She would stay in Copper Ridge. She would rebuild her life here not as the mysterious widow or the hidden agent, but as herself. All of herself. The scars and secrets included. She would wear the mask when she needed to, but not as a barrier between herself and the world, as a reminder of what she had survived, as proof that she was stronger than her past. The next morning she rode into town. Word spread quickly that she was out and about, and people gathered to greet her. Margaret dismounted in front of the general store, feeling self-conscious under so many eyes, but there was no mockery in their gazes, no cruelty, just curiosity and, in many faces, genuine warmth. Mrs. Patterson approached first, her weathered hands reaching out to clasp Margaret's.
"It's good to see you up and around, dear. We've been so worried. Thank you for taking care of my ranch."
"And for visiting me while I was laid up." "Nonsense. That's what neighbors do, what friends do." Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hands gently. "I want to apologize for how we treated you before. The whispers and the judgment. We were scared of what we didn't understand. But you showed us who you really are through your actions, and we're grateful to have you here." Others chimed in with similar sentiments. The blacksmith apologized for his silence during the Dixon confrontation. The shopkeeper offered her credit at his store, insisting she had more than earned it. Even Sheriff Coleman managed a gruff apology for his failures to protect her. It was overwhelming and humbling, and more than Margaret had ever expected. Danny pushed through the crowd, a wide smile on his young face. "There's something we want to show you," he said, taking her elbow and guiding her down the street. The crowd followed an impromptu parade through the center of town. They stopped in front of a building Margaret did not recognize. It had been the old abandoned telegraph office, but it had been completely renovated. Fresh paint gleamed on the walls. New windows reflected the morning sun. A sign hung above the door, and when Margaret read it, her throat tightened with emotion. "Cole Community Center," the sign read, "in honor of Margaret Cole, who taught us courage." "We took up a collection," Danny explained. "Everyone in town contributed what they could. We figured you might want a place that's yours, somewhere you can teach folks things, or just have a space that's not your ranch or our prying eyes. It's yours to do with as you please." Margaret could not speak. The gesture was so unexpected, so kind, that it broke through her carefully maintained composure. Tears streamed down her face, and she made no effort to hide them. These people had seen her at her worst and her best. They knew her secrets now, all of them. And instead of turning away, they had built her something beautiful. A place in their community. A home. "Thank you," she managed finally. "This is the most thoughtful thing anyone has ever done for me. You earned it 10 times over, Mrs. Easel," Patterson said. Now no more tears. "We've got a celebration planned. There's food at the church, and music and dancing. It's been too long since this town had something worth celebrating." The celebration was simple but joyful. People ate and talked and laughed. Children ran through the streets playing games. Someone brought out a fiddle and started playing lively tunes. Margaret found herself pulled into conversations, included in jokes, treated as one of them in a way she never had been before. The mask sat in her saddlebag, forgotten for the moment. She did not need it here. Not today. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town square, Margaret stood apart from the crowd and watched. These were her people now, her community. Her home. She had spent so many years running, hiding, fighting, but maybe it was time to stop. Maybe it was time to plant roots and see what grew. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Danny found her as the stars began appearing overhead. "Penny, for your thoughts? Just thinking about the future? About what comes next, and what does come next for the famous Margaret Cole?" "I don't know. Maybe I'll teach people to shoot. Maybe I'll raise horses. Maybe I'll just be a rancher and a neighbor and a friend. Maybe that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the celebration continue. Somewhere in the darkness beyond town, Margaret's past lingered. The memories of Jacob, the ghosts of her missions, the weight of all she had done and seen. But for the first time in years, the past did not feel like a burden. It felt like foundation. Everything she had been through had led her here, to this moment, to this place, and maybe that meant something. Maybe it meant she was exactly where she was supposed to be. In the weeks that followed, Margaret settled into a new rhythm. She spent her mornings working her ranch, tending to her animals, and maintaining her property. Afternoons she often spent at the community center, which had unofficially become a gathering place for anyone who wanted to learn practical skills. She taught shooting to those who wanted to improve their aim. She showed young women how to handle horses and defend themselves. She even gave lessons in tracking and survival skills, drawing on her years of agent training. The mask came out less and less often. She wore it occasionally when riding alone or when she needed the comfort of familiar armor, but in town, among friends, she went barefaced. The first few times had been terrifying. She kept expecting judgment, mockery, questions about why she had hidden for so long. But people simply accepted her as she was. They had seen behind the mask and found someone worth knowing. That was enough. Marshal Walsh returned one final time, 3 months after the confrontation with Garrett. He brought news from Denver. The last remaining members of the Garrett organization had been rounded up and brought to justice. The entire criminal empire was dismantled. It was truly over. No one would be coming after her for revenge. No one would be hunting her for her role in bringing down the family. She was free in every possible sense. "What will you do now?" Margaret asked him as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "Retire, I think. I've been chasing criminals for 30 years. Time to let younger men take over. I'm thinking about buying a little place in Colorado. Do some fishing. Maybe write my memoirs." "Sounds peaceful." "It does, doesn't it? What about you? Any regrets about staying here?" Margaret thought about the question seriously. "No. This is where I belong. These people have given me something I thought I'd lost forever. A chance to be myself without pretense or lies. That's worth more than all the money or fresh starts in the world." "I'm glad. You deserve happiness, Catherine. After everything you've been through, you've earned some peace." "Margaret," she corrected gently. "Catherine Morrison was the agent. She did her job and retired. I'm Margaret Cole now. Just Margaret."
Walsh smiled and nodded.
"Just Margaret. I like that." After the marshal left, Margaret walked her property as evening settled over the land. The sky turned from blue to purple to black, stars emerging one by one. Somewhere an owl called. Her horses whinnied softly in their corral. Everything was peaceful, safe, normal. For someone who had lived in constant danger for so long, normal felt like a miracle. She thought about Jacob often, especially on nights like this. He would have loved this place. Would have loved seeing her settled and content. The pain of losing him would never fully go away, but it had transformed into something gentler. A bittersweet ache instead of a sharp agony. She carried him with her in memory and gratitude. Their love had been real, even if it was brief. That mattered. That counted. A year passed. Then another. Margaret's ranch thrived. She expanded her herd, built a larger barn, hired a young couple to help with the heavy work. The community center became a fixture in town, hosting everything from shooting lessons to quilting circles to town meetings. Margaret became not just accepted, but respected. People sought her counsel on difficult matters. They trusted her judgment and valued her friendship. She never forgot what she had been. The mask hung on her wall as a reminder of the years spent hiding. But it was no longer a necessity. It was history, proof of survival. Evidence that even in the darkest times she had found the strength to endure. And that strength had brought her here, to a life she never could have imagined. A life of community and purpose and genuine connection. Danny eventually worked up the courage to court her properly. Margaret was surprised to find herself saying yes. He was younger, yes, but he saw her clearly. All of her. The scars and secrets and strength. And he loved her anyway. They took things slowly, building friendship into something deeper. There was no rush, no urgency. Just two people learning to trust and care for each other without masks or pretense. On a spring morning 3 years after the confrontation with Garrett, Margaret stood in her yard watching wildflowers bloom across the hills. The land was alive with color and possibility. She had built something here. Not just a ranch or a reputation, but a life. A real life with real connections and real meaning. She was no longer the mysterious widow or the legendary agent. She was just Margaret, a woman with a past who had chosen to build a future. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The town of Copper Ridge grew and changed around her. New families arrived. Children were born. Old-timers passed on, leaving their stories and wisdom behind. But Margaret remained constant. A steady presence. A reminder that courage came in many forms. That redemption was possible. That even those who wore masks to hide could eventually learn to show their true faces without fear. Her story became part of the town's legend, the widow who faced down outlaws and criminals. The agent who sacrificed everything for justice. The woman who finally found home. And every telling emphasized not the violence or danger, but the strength of character, the refusal to give up, the choice to trust again despite every reason not to. Margaret Cole had been called many things in her life. Ugly, mysterious, dangerous, heroic. But in the end, she was simply herself, scarred but standing. Broken, but healing, masked when necessary, but increasingly barefaced and brave. She had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to be vulnerable despite it. To let others see not just the strong parts, but the wounded parts too. To trust that love and acceptance were possible even for someone like her. Someone with blood on her hands and secrets in her past. Someone who had worn a mask for so long she had almost forgotten her own face. But she remembered now. And in remembering, she had finally come home.